What's up, guys? We're back with more picks and predictions. This weekend, we got a fight night headlined by Cory Sandhagen versus Deiveson Figueiredo. I'm excited to break down every single fight on this card. Without further ado, let's jump right into the picks and predictions for this weekend. Jumping right into it, we have a pretty boring matchup to kick off the card. We got Ivana Petrović versus Juliana Miller in the first fight. And let's be real, nobody really gives a shit about this fight. Juliana Miller is 3-3, only 6 fights in her pro MMA career. Ivana Petrović 7-2, coming off a loss to Jamie Lynn Horth. Juliana Miller on a 2-fight skid to Veronica Hardy and Luana Santos. And to be honest, this pick's got to be Ivana Petrović. I mean, this is a low-level women's MMA fight, probably as low-level as it can possibly get, to be honest. And, Ivana Petrović probably has the advantage both in the striking and the grappling and wrestling in this matchup. I think that, if she has some success on the feet, she's probably going to keep it there. If she thinks that, she's struggling a little bit on the feet, I think she can go take Juliana Miller down if she wants to. I think she can defend Miller's takedowns as well. So I kind of think that, the ball is going to be in Petrovic's court the entire fight, and she's going to be able to kind of dictate what the hell's going on in there. So that's why I'm going to pick her. I think that, she kind of has the advantage in most areas of this fight. Outside of that, I mean, anything could happen. I could totally see, Petrović kind of having the advantage, but just not doing a crazy amount more than Juliana Miller, and it just coming down to a really weird split decision. That wouldn't surprise me at all. So I'm going to go with Ivana Petrović. I think she should have her covered on, most sides of this fight, but at the end of the day, super low-level women's MMA fight. You never know what's going to happen. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight up on the card, we got Dontel Mays versus Thomas Petersen, and dude, this is like a pretty low-level card overall. Dontel Mays, he's really trash, and I think he was ranked a little bit ago, so we know how trash the heavyweight division is. Thomas Petersen, coming off a loss to the GOAT, Shamil Gaziev. Dontel Mays got heel hooked by Walter Walker, very, very quickly. And I just think that, Thomas Petersen, we see him shoot takedowns in fights. We know he can kind of go and get his takedown in there. Dontel Mays, on the other hand, I mean, if this fight comes into just like a stand and bang and just like Dontel Mays throwing like crazy power overhands, then sure, he probably beats Thomas Petersen in a fight like that. But if Thomas Petersen has any sense at all, he won't do that with Dontel Mays. So I think Thomas Petersen is a better fighter. He's more skilled. He has more ways to win. I think that Dontel Mays is actually like a pretty trash fighter in general. So it's really hard for me to pick Dontel Mays. So this is more of a Dontel Mays fade than a Thomas Petersen pick, but I'm going to pick Thomas Petersen to get it done. I think he just shoots some takedowns, man, and I think if he's on top of Dontel Mays is not going to stand back up. So Thomas Petersen is going to be the pick. Let's move on to the next matchup. Moving up the card, we got Gaston Bolaños versus Quang Lee. Pretty straightforward breakdown here. I think that Bolaños is a cleaner striker. If this fight stays standing, you're going to see Bolaños get the better of Quang Lee in exchanges. He also has, decent power to go with it. I can kind of see Bolaños putting Quang Lee down with the shot necessarily if it does stay on the feet long enough. On the Quang Lee side, I mean, Quang Lee is a decent striker. He was pretty quick. Does throw a decent amount of volume too, but he also can mix it up more than Bolaños in this matchup. I think that, Quang Lee probably wants to shoot some takedowns on a Gaston Bolaños, and, he might have some success in that department if he does. So I can see a world where, Quang Lee mixes it up, just kind of does more and gets this one done this weekend against Gaston Bolaños. But that being said, Bolaños is going to be my pick. I do think that, he can defend enough of the takedowns. I think he can keep this fight standing enough, and I think he can pull away on the feet here. In his last fight against Cortavius Ramius, I mean, Ramius is, pretty ass. Now that we've kind of seen him in two UFC fights kind of get, taken over in both of those fights. He's lost to Bolaños, obviously, and then after that he lost to Chang Ho Lee very recently. So Cortavius Ramius isn't the best win, because he should be someone that you're beating at this point. But that being said, Ramius did shoot a bunch of takedowns in that matchup against Gaston Bolaños, and Bolaños was able to work his way back up, didn't accept bottom position. And even if Quang Lee does get takedowns here, I don't see him having the top pressure to kind of just hold Bolaños down. I think that Bolaños will work his way back up, and then on the feet, he'll be able to take over. So Bolaños is going to be the pick. I can see why the line is close, though, because Quang Lee can mix it up. And yeah, let's move on to the next matchup. Next up on the card, we got Marina Rodriguez versus Gillian Robertson. The more I go up this card, the more I realize that it is actually a pretty trash card, especially from a betting perspective, because while, there are ways to break these fighters down, these fighters aren't like the most trustworthy fighters, I guess, to put your money behind. So it's going to be interesting making the bet slip this week, but we're going to find our spots as usual. In this matchup, I'm going with Gillian Robertson to get it done. Marina Rodriguez, She's 38 years old, has, tons of experience in the UFC, been in the UFC for a hell of a long time. So that is something going for her. But the one thing that we've noticed is that with all this UFC experience for, years on end, all the fighters she's fought, her takedown defense is just abysmal. I mean, in her last fight against Yasmin Lucindo, she lost a split decision, and Lucindo was able to, get a ton of takedowns on her. And when it comes to someone like Yasmin Lucindo, I mean, she just lost to Amanda Lemos, and Lemos, not known to, have the best grappling, but she kind of out-grappled Lucindo in that matchup. So Marina Rodriguez, she is decent on the feet, can definitely pack a little bit of a punch, but the issue is she can't stop herself from being taken down. She's fighting a 29-year-old Gillian Robertson, so someone who's almost 10 years younger than her coming into this, that has that threat, that can definitely get her to the ground if needed. And I just see, Robertson just being able to impose that game plan, on Marina Rodriguez, and I just don't see her stopping the takedowns. I think Robertson can get this one done, and let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight up, we got Ryan Loder versus Azamat Bekoev, and I'm going to go with Bekoev to beat Ryan Loder this weekend. I think that Bekoev is definitely going to be the stronger fighter in this matchup. I think he has a strength advantage. Azamat Bekoev, man, I think he's extremely well-rounded. He's dangerous on the feet. He's got power, good striking. He has good wrestling as well. We saw him use that in his, UFC debut against Zach Reese. Saw him, get him out of there with that ground and pound. So he's dangerous if the fight goes to the ground. He can definitely get the fight to the ground. Has good wrestling. He also does have pretty strong, pretty powerful striking. So I just think that he's going to just outmuscle Ryan Loder here. I think he can kind of dictate where the fight goes. Loder has good grappling. I just don't see him, being able to impose that on Azamat Bekoev this weekend. I think this matchup is pretty good for Bekoev. And yeah, I see him getting it done. I mean, if he knocks out Ryan Loder, I wouldn't be surprised. If I'm not mistaken, Ryan Loder has never been knocked out in his career, though. So, I mean, he would be the first one to do it. But outside of that, if he just, wins this one on the scorecards as well, would not be surprised. But Bekoev's going to be the pick. Fairly confident that he gets this one done. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight up, we got Yana Santos versus Miesha Tate. When I tell you this card is weak, man, it's a pretty weak card. These are the type of fights that, who the hell wants to really break down? But, I mean, look, Miesha Tate's 38 years old. We know that in this fight, she's going to want to get takedowns. She's going to get control time on Yana Santos. Yana Santos is 35, so she's not much younger herself. I'm going to slightly lean Miesha Tate. I think it just comes down to, if Yana Santos wins, it's going to be a defend the takedown and, land a bunch of strikes type of fight. And if Miesha Tate wins, then she's going to get takedowns, get control, and, win rounds that way. So either way, this fight's going to be trash. I'm going to go with Miesha Tate. I think that Miesha Tate's going to come out there, wrestle. I think she is in pretty decent shape for being 38 years old. And I just think that, she'll probably be able to get some takedowns on Yana Santos here. This is definitely not a fight you bet on, though. If you are betting on this, super degen. But yeah, I'm going to go with Miesha Tate. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight up, we got the main card opener in Jeremy Stephens versus Mason Jones. Both of these guys are making their return to the octagon. They were both previously in the UFC and now making a comeback. Jeremy Stephens, we know who he is. He's the hardest hitting 145er on the planet. When he hits people, they don't get back up. We know who Jeremy Stephens is. Great guy, really entertaining to watch. And then Mason Jones on the other side was in the UFC prior, has some okay wins back then. David Onama to be one of them, but lost to Mike Davis, lost to Ludovic Klein, then went back to Cage Warriors, where he rattled off 4 wins in a row, and now he's back in the UFC, coming back against Jeremy Stephens. Now, the odds for this fight are a little bit wide. I mean, I don't think Mason Jones is necessarily worth the minus 500 price tag, but he is going to be the pick. I think he does get this one done. He's more well-rounded for sure. He has a decent shot in the stand-up in this fight, but if he goes to the wrestling, goes to the takedowns, I definitely think he can get them on Jeremy Stephens and win that way as well. So I think he has more weapons. Jeremy Stephens, he can put anyone out, and in this fight, he's been doing bare knuckle boxing. He's been doing decent in bare knuckle boxing as well, coming off that win to Eddie Alvarez there. So he can come out here and knock Mason Jones out. That's very possible. But I just think that, Mason Jones has more paths to victory here. I definitely think that, I think he actually gets it done on the cards. I don't think he finds a finish on Jeremy Stephens. I think Stephens is pretty tough. But yeah, that's about it. I feel like Mason Jones, he should go to the wrestling if he wants to win this in the path of least resistance. So Mason Jones is going to be the pick, and let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight up, we got Cameron Smotherman versus Serhiy Sidey, and I'm going to go with Cameron Smotherman to beat Serhiy Sidey. I think that, Smotherman, probably a popular dog this week. He came out and took a UFC debut on short notice against Drake Hadley 6 months ago and absolutely destroyed Jake Hadley. I think Jake Hadley got cut from the promotion after that fight. And, Jake Hadley had a couple decent UFC wins. He had a UFC win over Callan Loughran. And Callan Loughran, I mean, he just, had a good win against Nathan Fletcher. So these are people that, are fighting in the UFC. And, Jake Hadley kind of dominated Callan Loughran in that fight. So Jake Hadley was pretty decent. Comes out there, absolutely gets dominated by Cameron Smotherman on short notice. And Smotherman, he has really, really good boxing. That's going to kind of be his path to victory in a lot of fights. If he goes to the ground, he's a little bit lost. I don't think Serhiy Sidey is a threat to take him to the ground, though. Serhiy Sidey, pretty interesting striker, pretty unorthodox, does have pretty good range, and that's kind of been his advantage in most of his fights. He will have a little bit of a reach advantage in this fight against Cameron Smotherman, but if he can't hold that range and Smotherman kind of gets into his face and gets this into boxing range, I think it's all Smotherman. So I see him doing that. I like Smotherman's forward pressure. I think he knows he's going to have to break that range of Serhiy Sidey, get inside and work his boxing. That's going to be his path to victory. I think he does that, and I think he, wins this one on the scorecard. So I'm going to go with Cameron Smotherman as an underdog. I think, he does have the tools to get this one done. Serhiy Sidey, also not a very impressive performance in his last outing against Garrett Armfield. He won a split decision, but in reality, if you go watch that fight, fairly certain that he lost that fight. I wasn't complaining. I had a bet on CD in that matchup, so I wasn't complaining about the decision. But in reality, not the best performance by Serhiy Sidey. I'm thinking Smotherman gets this one done. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next matchup, we got Montel Jackson versus Daniel Marcos, and I'm going to go with Montel Jackson in this one. I know Daniel Marcos is 17-0 undefeated, but, the betting lines reflected too. Montel Jackson, a 2-1 favorite here, and I think it makes sense. I think that Montel Jackson, you see, when he struggles, it's a lot of the pressure coming his way. But I just don't think Daniel Marcos is the fighter that can, dictate a fight, dictate a pace on a fighter like Montel Jackson. I think that Montel Jackson has the finishing upside here. He's got all the power. I don't see Daniel Marcos, putting Montel Jackson out. On top of that, I think Montel Jackson has more ways to win. If he wants to take this fight to the ground, he has that available to him. Daniel Marcos has good takedown defense. It's not going to be easy to take Daniel Marcos to the ground, but if this does go to the ground, it's going to be on Montel Jackson's accord. So Montel Jackson can mix it up. He's a more well-rounded fighter. He's a more dangerous fighter. He has the finishing upside. The only thing that Daniel Marcos has slightly on Montel Jackson is potentially the striking volume, but we'll see how that plays out because both these guys are pretty defensively sound, A, and B, Daniel Marcos knows that, there's some real power coming back his way in this matchup against Montel Jackson. So I think that Montel Jackson just kind of has all the advantages. The only way I see Daniel Marcos winning this is if, he really just very close decision, kind of how Daniel Marcos tends to win though. So that is one thing to note, but a very close decision where just the volume, he kind of just out volumes Montel Jackson just by a little bit. And that's kind of what gets it done for Daniel Marcos. But I don't see that happening. I think the more paths to victory for Montel Jackson. So he's going to be the pick. And let's move on to the next matchup. This next matchup, we got Daniel Rodriguez versus Santiago Ponzinibbio. And the more I break this card down, the worse these fights get. Nobody really cares about Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Daniel Rodriguez in 2025. Let's be real. Both these guys are 38 years old. There's no real, this doesn't really change anything in the welterweight division. But I guess, we do have this fight, and I'm going to have to give this one slightly to Daniel Rodriguez. I'm leaning there. I think this is a really tough one to call as well. I see that, Daniel Rodriguez, I think he's just going to be moving forward more, and I think he's just going to be throwing more volume. I think Ponzinibbio has slightly more power in the hands, but we don't really see Daniel Rodriguez get knocked out. So that's not really, at least not with punches. We saw obviously Ian Gary knock out Daniel Rodriguez, but Santiago Ponzinibbio is not Ian Gary. So I'm gonna go with Daniel Rodriguez. I think that he's going to be able to just throw a little bit more volume and maybe squeak out a very close decision. If this fight goes split decision, I'm not surprised whatsoever. So, this one is a full stay away. I'm going to lean Daniel Rodriguez. That's about it. Let's move on to the next matchup. All right, in the co-main event, we got RDR versus Bo Nickel. And to be honest, I'm a pretty big fan of Reinier de Ridder, but I'm going to have to fade him this week. I've actually bet on de Ridder on both his UFC fights. His debut against GM3, I did bet on him there. And then in his last fight against Kevin Holland, if you're any fighter that's decent at all, you're beating Kevin Holland. I'm always fading Kevin Holland, but I did bet on him against Gunnar Nelson. So I think I have a really good gauge on how good Kevin Holland is. But yeah, I bet on Reinier de Ridder in his last two fights, and I'm a pretty big fan of him. He's made me some good money, but at the end of the day, in this fight against Bo Nickel, de Ridder, pretty good on the ground, really solid. That's kind of where his main path to victory is. Really good submission artist himself. When it comes to his striking, his striking is just very lackluster. not that good at all, not technical at all. And I think that Bo Nickel can just kind of piece him up on the feet here. I think Bo Nickel is very, very similar to his last fight against Paul Craig. He knows that, the submission, the jiu-jitsu is kind of his opponent's best path to victory. And if he just uses his wrestling more in a defensive manner and just not let the fight get to the ground, that might actually be the best use of his wrestling in this fight. So, bro, I can see Bo Nickel just kind of doing what he does against Paul Craig, keeping the fight standing, just piecing RDR up on the feet. Bo Nickel, not the best striker, but does have some power, and I think he is getting pretty clean in the striking, definitely more technical than RDR. I think that if Bo Nickel comes out there and just can, outpoint RDR on the feet, similar to what he did to Paul Craig, I don't see why he wouldn't take that. That's probably the path of least resistance for Bo Nickel. So he might not even have to use his wrestling. We know his wrestling is definitely better, but RDR on the jiu-jitsu side is definitely the more dangerous grappler out of the two. So I think Bo Nickel stays safe, very similar to the Paul Craig fight. I think he can beat RDR up on the feet. And yeah, let's move on to the main event. In the main event, we got Cory Sandhagen versus Deiveson Figueiredo, and I'm going to have to go with Cory Sandhagen. I mean, he's a massive favorite, and this is going to be one of those fights where, yeah, Cory Sandhagen might not feel like a minus 500, but if you play this fight back out, 10 times, Cory Sandhagen probably comes out with 8, maybe 9 wins against the Deiveson Figueiredo. I think that Figueiredo does have the power advantage. If he lands one clean, he does have really good power for the division, so if he lands one clean, he could probably put a lot of people out. Cory Sandhagen, probably being a part of that. I mean, Cory Sandhagen doesn't really get knocked out. I don't think he's ever been knocked out, actually. But with someone like Deiveson Figueiredo's power, you kind of just assume that if he does land super clean on someone, he can put them out. So he has that chance going for him. But outside of that, I mean, Sandhagen, the more technical, the more clean striker, definitely. Figueiredo does have the wrestling to kind of go for him. But, I mean, Cory Sandhagen coming off a loss to Umar Nurmagomedov, where he did defend the takedowns pretty well. I think, in that camp, there's probably a lot of wrestling going into it. And just like Cory Sandhagen, I just don't see him getting wet blanketed by Deiveson Figueiredo. So Figueiredo, his best win in the division was probably, Chito Vera. And, I mean, that's not really aging too well in my eyes. I mean, Chito Vera is good, but, how good really is Chito Vera? And then he comes out there, gets dominated by Peter Yan, absolutely dominated by Peter Yan. And now he's fighting Cory Sandhagen. I think that Cory Sandhagen definitely has the tools to get it done. So while minus 500 is probably a pretty steep price, it's just kind of hard for me to see a path for Figueiredo here. I don't see him, doing the wet blanket stuff. Maybe he does land one big one, but I can't really go and rely on that. So Sandhagen probably gonna be able to piece him up. Definitely more skilled. Probably has him covered in most areas of this fight. So Cory's gonna be the pick, and that does it for the picks and predictions for UFC Fight Night. That does it for all the picks and predictions for this weekend's UFC Fight Night card. Fairly weak card in my opinion. This was probably the one that I'm least hyped up to break down in general. I think my betting size for this weekend is going to be fairly low. The unit size might go down just a little bit for this weekend. But next weekend we got UFC 315, so that's going to be a good one. Definitely check out kopicks.win if you guys want to check out our premium bets for $20 a month. We were profitable last week at UFC Kansas City. We gave some profit back during the main card, but we actually almost swept the prelims. Swept bets on the prelims for sure, and that put us in the money for the entire night. Gave a little bit back, like I said, on the main card, but premium's been pretty profitable over the last couple months. All time, we're up money as well, so definitely check out kopicks.win. For $20 a month, you basically get access to all our bets every single weekend, unit sizes and all, even what books we're placing those bets on. So check that out if you get a chance, and aside from that, good luck on everyone's bets this weekend.